on the phone. It's a pleasure to welcome to the program Greg Mitchell. He is a daily blogger at the Nation magazine at nation.com, nationmagazine.com, author of over a dozen books. His most recent, an ebook, When Hollywood Turned Left, was derived from an earlier book of his, The Campaign of the Century, about Upton Sinclair's epic run for governor in California. And I should also say, also someone who has been really great at chronicling those who were cheerleaders of the Iraq invasion and occupation. Greg, welcome to the program.
Thank you. I'm here, I think.
Yes. All right. So let's talk about this. You know, the like I mentioned in your intro, the When Hollywood Turned Left was derived in many respects, pulled out in your piece or your book, I should say, on Upton Sinclair's famous run for governor, the epic campaign, his campaign to end poverty in California. Just give us a little bit of background. I mean, the Hollywood turned left in some respects as a result of that campaign, but it was sort of a bank shot in a way.
Yeah, absolutely. Upton Sinclair ran for governor. He's a famous socialist and, of course, an author, as we all know, in 1934 as a Democrat in California in the depths of the Depression, leading a mass movement called End Poverty in California, or EPIC. And amazingly, he swept the Democratic primary and appeared headed for victory that November against a hack Republican. And that so frightened people out there and around the country that it inspired what I called in my book the campaign of the century, the birth of the modern campaign. We saw the first use of political consultants from outside the political party, advertising whizzes from Madison Avenue, national fundraising for a state race. It set all records for a campaign, $10 million perhaps. And it inspired Hollywood's first all-out plunge into politics, including Irving Thalberg creating the first attack ads for the screen, which of course was a movie screen then, but it was the forerunner of all the attack ads we would later see on television. So it was quite a campaign, and I wrote the book about 20 years ago. And it's a 640-page book, and drew wide acclaim, won a top award, et cetera, et cetera. But people always said I should pull out the Hollywood stuff and for a more reader-friendly experience. So I've finally done that in an ebook. I've added new material as well, so it's not strictly just a reprint. There's new material, updated, and so on and so forth. So that's called When Hollywood Turned Left, and that's what it focuses on.
I want to get to sort of the broader implications, both of what that campaign told us about what was happening in America at the time, and also sort of the implications of we've never really that campaign, I guess, set our politics on a trajectory, a path that maybe was inevitable, but maybe it wasn't in terms of the way that we perceive politics and campaigns are waged. But I mean, tell us what was going on that so, I guess, I don't want to say radicalized, because I think that may be an overstatement, but what politicized Hollywood.
Right. Well, it surprises some people to learn today that Hollywood was once very right-wing. Almost all the moguls were conservative Republicans. Most of them were Jewish immigrants, very heavily involved. Louis B. Mayer of MGM was a Republican leader in California, and so they, it was a much more of a conservative place, and the screenwriters and actors guilds, which of course became very strong later, were just founded in 1933. This is the year before this campaign. And they didn't have top stars involved at that time, very much up for grabs whether they would make it as unions. And so that's this race in 1934. We saw the moguls come out against Sinclair, work very actively. They threatened to move the studios to Florida. as one stunt. There's another stunt. Actually, I write about it at The Nation today. If you go to the Nation site, you'll see my blog post from the book. They deducted one day's pay from every one of their employees, from the top stars to equipment managers, and they basically just took one day's pay out of all the paychecks and donated it to GOP slush fund. So that was groundbreaking as well.
Was that now? What was the legality of that at the time?
Oh, it didn't matter. I mean, California was run by Republicans. The studios were very powerful, so I mean, they just did it. A few people resisted. Jimmy Cagney, Billy Wilder. There were some exceptions, but the stunts, along with the Thalberg attack ads on the screen, which is a series of 3 faked newsreels using Hollywood actors to portray, Sinclair supporters who were endorsing the Soviet Union and communism, was so outrageous that it inspired this move to the left, which I focus on in this new ebook. And this was there are obviously other reasons as well, but this was the prime mover in the sudden shift in the mid-1930s from a very conservative Hollywood to a much more liberal Hollywood. The actors and the screenwriters guilds finally took off. They staged strikes, and the actors and writers organized for Franklin Roosevelt, of course, and for other things, and they actually got one of Sinclair's top allies elected governor in 1938. And California has remained, with a few exceptions, very liberal since. Hollywood itself has remained very liberal since. So this was really the turning point.
I mean, was it a function of just who these people were, or was it the overreach by the studio heads? I mean, it seems like they were basically run. These studios were run by just Sheldon, what we would perceive as like a Sheldon Adelson type,
right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, it was an overreach, and it got people so outraged. I mean, Sinclair was was a former socialist. He ran as a Democrat and swept the primary and was headed for victory. This is not an exaggeration. And he had one of the greatest mass movements in the history of America. So the book chronicles that as well. It's one of the great stories of the progressive past. And they were ready to win, basically. And so these extraordinary measures that I've mentioned, from the fundraising to all sorts of fake, dirty tricks. It's an incredibly entertaining, disgraceful story, but extremely entertaining because there were so many, breakthroughs in terms of dirty tricks and Madison Avenue and all sorts of things that were done to defeat Sinclair. And spoiler alert, he did end up losing. Drew a record number of votes for a Democrat. California itself was very Republican then. So this changed the politics of California. It also pushed the New Deal to the left. People forget that the first couple of years of the New Deal, we didn't have the Social Security reform, et cetera, and it really was after the Sinclair race and some other left-wing Democrats of 1934 that really pushed Roosevelt to the left. And so this was that's why I called my original book The Campaign of the Century, because it really was one of the most influential campaigns of our time. And but I was happy to do this Hollywood spin-off now.
And so, I mean, how much of what was happening in that campaign was a function of the time? How much further was Sinclair taking it? I mean, because it seems like it was sort of an analogy of what was happening nationwide.
Yeah, there was, Roosevelt was elected in 1932. It was hard to say what that meant because it was a rejection of Hoover and Republicans. Roosevelt then took his first steps towards the New Deal, but to some extent it was like Obama with Obamacare, which many on the left were happy he got something through, but extremely unhappy that it's so limited. And so you have people on the left who have are pushing for single payer or whatever. So it's similar to that in the sense that the early days of the New Deal were certainly welcome, but the left wanted much more. And after 1934, they got it. The most hallowed New Deal reforms that we speak of today came after 1934.
Now, I guess in some sense, at some level, it makes sense that the first attack ads would come out of Hollywood. But I mean, talk about because this is the tools that these reactionary forces have at their disposal. Talk about what you see that was developed there that still continues to this day. I mean, aside, I guess, from attack ads.
Well, I mean, the attack ads was quite a breakthrough because the movie screen and later TV screen, of course, tremendously influential. People are there thinking they're going to see a down the middle, report, sort of believe what they see on the screen. So to have these sort of faked newsreels, people fell for it, and there were, in places where there were a lot of Sinclair supporters in attendance, there were riots. Great protests, but by and large, it worked. The attack ads definitely swayed votes. Again, some people attribute them to the defeat of Sinclair. So it really worked, and it gave a signal for the future on the use of filmed images. There always were dirty tricks. It's not that dirty tricks were invented in this campaign, but the extent of them, the use of true professionals, outside people, experts, or Irving Thalberg, who is a saintly figure, and we all know of the Thalberg Award that's given every year on the Oscar broadcast, and it's just sort of shocking that even Thalberg would be involved in something like this.
And I mean, what at the time, was there any type of pushback? I mean, how did people react to this? Just, I mean, more from a perspective of the way it changed their sense of what Hollywood was and what that medium, I guess, could do in the wrong hands, or was it? Was there sort of some measure of awareness that this was problematic?
Yeah, well, that's why the actors and the writers and others in Hollywood took action. They sort of felt that this was the coming main influencer of Americans in an entertainment world. TV was still 20 years in the future, and so they sort of saw that, and we also saw importantly that. Hollywood then started making more what you might call progressive movies. Again, there always had been some social protest or social image type movies, but after 1934, there were many more. Grapes of Wrath and so on. So the writers and the actors who were now in the ascendancy politically then felt free to produce more liberal works, if you will, social protest, social issue types of movies, and of course, again, that continued for decades into the future. So, like I said, it's a surprise to many people that Hollywood was ever reactionary, but now it's many decades now where the liberals, let's put Ronald Reagan aside, but even Ronald Reagan. I never got a chance to talk to him about this campaign, but back then he was a Hollywood liberal, and he became head of the Actors Guild. And it wasn't until the blacklist days of the late 1940s that he turned to the right. But Reagan himself might have endorsed this turn to the left in the mid 1930s.
How was it that the actors and the writers ended up having the ability to sort of express those politics when it was seemingly the studio heads still controlled the process? Right.
Well, the studio heads were mainly out for money. They could tell which way the wind was blowing, and they sort of, well, if you can make me money that's great. And of course, there were some exceptions. The Warner Brothers were more liberal. I wouldn't know if you'd call them liberal, but they were known as sometime Democrats. So you did have one studio that was not quite in the conservative mainstream. And so you can go through and see which studios released which movies, but by and large, they wanted to make dough, and they would put that aside. If even if the politics wasn't quite to their liking.
And so, I mean, as we see this evolution, I mean, were the people working? I mean, I'm curious as to, was it just simply, was there some propensity that the writers and the actors had that would make them more, to the left, I guess, or was it simply that they were in some ways radicalized because of things like showing up and finding that, a big chunk of your paycheck is going to fund somebody that you're not interested in funding?
Right. Well, that, like I said, in the book, I do trace that the outrage that helped spark that. But they're creative types, and as we all know, creative types tend to be more liberal. And a lot of the writers had been imported from New York. This was the great era of Dorothy Parker, who's a major character in the book. F. Scott Fitzgerald, William Faulkner, and so forth. All the great writers who had been imported from the East, who were writing screenplays. And so you did have this influx of people from outside. So certainly the screenwriters tended to be quite liberal, and actors were more divided, but you had plenty of liberal actors. And it was really the guild. I mean, the guilds that were formed in 1933 were slow to get going, but once they got going, it's I suppose the book in a way is a hat tip to the power of unions. And gee, wasn't it great when people could really organize and change the world, or at least change their world? And so the book does have an epilogue that traces that, traces the growth of the guilds, what we see today. So it was a case of the key people in Hollywood organizing, and then being able to get better benefits for all, and being able to not, for example, get money deducted from their paychecks for Republican candidates.
How do you think that, has evolved over time? I've seen some discussion about, like, just for instance, the Oscars over the past couple of years. We've had a lot of very important sort of political documentaries, for instance, that have come out, and the Oscars seem to be sort of veering away from this. In my sense of Hollywood now is that it's far less political in many respects.
Right.
Lifestyle.
I think where it is political, it still tends to be liberal, but certainly the focus is on blockbuster movies, on comic book heroes, 3D, and so on and so forth. So, Captain America is not going to move people to the left. And it's a dumbing down, lowest common denominator, et cetera, et cetera. So, except for the tremendous rise of truly great and important documentaries, the fiction side of Hollywood you're getting fewer and fewer social issue movies. Now, a lot of them get nominated for Oscars. So if you watch an Oscars broadcast, you might say, "Wow, look at that!" and look at this movie and that movie, and boy, they're still making great social issue movies, but it just tends to be that these may get nominated for Oscars. But if you look at the overall number of movies that have those sorts of themes, they're certainly in decline, and so you do sort of have to look at documentaries today. Yeah,
and also, my sense is that there's a far less of an awareness, sort of a class consciousness in movies, certainly from that time, but I know there's an ebb and flow to these things, but we, by all accounts, the last 5 or 6 years have brought about, in just about every facet of society, at least it seems to me, pockets of class awareness that Hollywood seems to be immune from. I mean, I mean, am I? I mean, is that your sense?
Well, I mean, yeah. I mean, there's great separation. I mean, there always has been some separation from writers and actors from the real world. But of course, there's even more. I suppose you talk about the 1% of actors and writers in Hollywood as well. But and I'm sure that contributes to it. But there's very little sense that that there should be that social issue type movies need to be made or will do well at the box office. They're competing with comic book movies, and thank God some still get made, and you can find them and catch up with them, but there's no pressure to do that. You get the George Clooney's and so forth, and they want to make a really relevant movie every so often, and so forth, but there's no real pressure for that. In the mid 1930s, again coming out of what I write about in the book, there were all sorts of movies that were made, agitation to make such movies. Yeah, we still had The Wizard of Oz and so forth, but there were terrific, hard-hitting movies as well, and
we saw that there in the early 70s too, right? I mean, I feel like there was at least more responsiveness in the past to what was going on in the country than I think we see now. I mean, on some level, it seems Hollywood has become far more about just full-on escapism. Am I right? I mean, it's always been that way, but I mean, it just seems like there's even less responsiveness today.
Well, that's certainly true. It's the 70s was kind of a golden era. You hate to sound like an old fogey, but you could trace the movies that were made in the 1970s. Even, I mean, a movie like Taxi Driver or something, you could say, well, was that really a social issue movie? But you look at what it chronicled and it's what it was looking at. It certainly was a lot different than the Avengers. Or the animated films of today. So, Dog Day Afternoon and so forth. Movies you may not even think of as real social protest, but were steeped in social realism and the issues of the day. So, it's been a slow decline. There's no question about it, and it's a shame. But in terms of politically, when we read about who the actors and people in Hollywood are donating to, what they're organizing for in campaigns, who's endorsing popular issues, doing, PSA ads and so forth, it's still overwhelmingly on the left. And again, that's what I trace in the book, going back to this turning point in the mid 1930s, and there's no question that the Hollywood community as a whole is liberal. What they do with that, or what kind of films they make, is another matter.
Indeed. Well, Greg Mitchell, the ebook is When Hollywood Turned Left. We'll put a link to that on our site at majority.fm. Thanks so much for your time today.
Sure, Sam. Thank you.